Welcome to the weekly Impact Sales Tribe VIP call. This is Joe Beck with the Sales Activist, and I'm excited to go through this topic that we're going to cover today. I'd wanted to do this one a little bit last week, but I really wanted to dedicate enough time specifically to this one because it impacts so many different people in so many different ways. And it's something that it's one of those foundational pieces that no matter what you're using for your system or however you're attracting people, you never want to lose sight of kind of what we're going to talk about today, because this is one that holds back a lot of people because they might have an amazing product or service or offering. And once they get to people, they have a phenomenal conversion rate. Like they're able to convert people really well once they get an opportunity to talk to people at length. It's just that awkward little period of time from the time they first identify them to the point that they're a legitimate prospect talking to that person that is the problem for them. So today we're going to talk about suspect to prospect nurturing and why it's so important in whatever it is that you do and whatever it is that you're offering to maintain a really good understanding and comfort level with suspect to prospect nurturing. Now, I should probably start with my own little disclaimer in this. This is one of those ones that I myself tend to have to remind myself over and over again to not take my finger off the pulse of this personally, and it's because, things change in the world around you. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And what may have worked a year ago may not work anymore. What may have worked 6 months ago or 6 days ago may not work, depending upon everything that's happened. And the more reliant we get on systems, sometimes we have to remember that we can't lose sight of the core pieces that are required to nurture somebody from just being a suspect to being a prospect. Because if your system breaks down and you have to insert yourself into it, you need to remember how to do it. If whoever is helping you with the system, whether it's a service provider that does a particular service, a marketing company, or whether it's somebody else that does it, or just some other thing that you've built in automation to kind of do this, if it's not working and if you have to go back to the drawing board and you have to start all over, what are the basics? What do you need to have down? What do you need to really master to do it well? That's what we're going to be talking about today. So today we're going to be talking all about suspect to prospect nurturing and why it's so important. And, that'll take up probably about half of our call. Then we'll open it up for some questions, as we always do on the VIP. So let's first start with what I think is really, really important for everybody to understand as it relates to not just suspect to prospect nurturing, but just anything in today's world. Like, you all know this because you hear me talk about this over and over again. It's very, very true. It's a very, very noisy, crowded world. We were just talking before we started the call about, how you can go onto a social media platform. I referenced TikTok, and all of a sudden, you're just overwhelmed with stuff. Stuff's coming at you from every angle, right? So how do you stand out? How do you really get people's attention? How do you get them to listen? Like, I know part of the problem with a lot of people isn't that they're not good at what they do. It isn't that they don't have a really amazing offer that can provide significant impact for their prospects and their clients. They have all that. It's just sometimes they struggle with getting enough attention and getting enough eyes on what it is that they do. So the number one rule, and this is the big writer downer for this session, whatever it is that you do, you need to make sure that you don't forget rule number one, which is you have to provide a compelling enough reason for somebody to listen to you. Now, that reason could take the shape or form of a lot of different things. It could be just based on the strength or power of your social media profile, or something that you post or put out there might be a compelling enough reason for them to listen to you if it resonates with them. But 9 times out of 10, just because of how noisy and crowded the world is, and just because people aren't always aware, nor do they stop and pay attention to a lot of things around them, 9 times out of 10, that compelling reason that they're going to listen to you about is something that you point out to them to get their attention. It might be something as simple as, I've noticed this on your profile, or I've saw your post, and that connects with me. And I want to share something that I think you'd appreciate. There has to be a reason that they're actually going to listen. There has to be something in it for them. And the second part of rule number one is just that. It's the old, with them, what's in it for me? Like, everybody wants to know what's in it for them. That's the radio station they're dialed into. What do they get out of it? Now, I'm not in any way trying to say that people are selfish, but in today's world, if you don't connect with what's in it for them, what they get out of it, if you don't somehow come up with a way quickly to identify what's going to be in it for them and give them a compelling enough reason for them to listen to you, they're going to tune out. They're going to tune out and not listen to what you say in that message. They're going to tune out and not pay attention to your posts. They're going to tune out and not listen to any future or upcoming things that you share. There has to be something that grabs their attention and is a compelling enough reason for them to listen. And it really has become, in many ways, an art form, on how to get people's attention in a crowded world, in a noisy world. Like, now more than ever before, it's changed. We talk, you talk about it all the time. You see it all online, things like Chat GPT, being able to use automation to generate content and posts and information and to do certain functional tasks. That may be well and good in certain areas of business, but the split second that it stops providing some compelling enough reason for people to listen to you, it won't matter how efficient you are. It won't matter how great your automation works if it doesn't resonate with what it is that they're looking for. If there's not something that you're offering or gets their attention that's strong enough or a compelling enough reason, they aren't going to listen. And that starts all the way at the suspect phase. Just because you identify them as a suspect doesn't mean they want to talk to you. And it certainly doesn't mean that they're even going to stick around long enough to become a prospect and get qualified. So the top of the list has to be that rule number one, making sure that whatever reason you give them, it's strong enough for them to listen, right? That's top of the list. Number one thing that you should always remember. You also, and this is something that has changed recently that I think is really, really important. It's not the first part of this sentence, but it's the second part that's been impacted recently. You should always lead with providing some form of value first. Now, I'm not saying that's the only way, and I'm not saying that that's going to be the case in every example. Like, there are still people that are, look, let's get down to business. Tell me what you do. If I like it, I'm interested. If not, I'm not, and I move on. There's still some people that operate that way. But most of the time, especially when you don't have a relationship with somebody and you're trying to nurture a relationship, you need to provide some form of value first. Now, when you think of a lot of the traditional forms of value, that could be in sharing information. It could be in commenting or liking or sharing some relevant content that they may be interested in. It could be making somebody aware of something that they weren't aware of. One of my best clients, believe it or not, and this is, it just goes to the point of how you never know what is really going to resonate with somebody. One of my best clients, consulting clients, been with me for a year and a half now. The way we got to know each other is I sent him a connection request. We connected. I sent him a follow-up message a couple of days later. We'll talk about that in a minute. Didn't really go anywhere. And about 3 weeks later, I happened to be looking at his profile again, and I noticed something that he had misspelled in his profile. And as weird as this sounds, I reached out to him. I sent him a private message. I didn't post it in the comments the way some people do, which absolutely drives me nuts. Like, why go out of your way to embarrass somebody and upset somebody by pointing something like that out in the general comments? I sent him a private message and I said, hey, I have a lot of respect for you and what you're doing in your company. I've been following you since we connected. Just wanted to make you aware. I noticed that you misspelled this word on your profile. I wanted to make you aware of it. I wouldn't want anything to reflect poorly upon you and what you're building with your business. I'm a big fan. And within an hour, He had sent me back a message thanking him so much, telling me that that profile had been updated at almost a year ago. Nobody pointed it out, which, was even more upsetting. But he said he was so appreciative because, clearly, number one, I took the time to look at the profile. I approached him professionally and respectfully. I didn't take a shot at him about it. But what he really liked is, I complimented him on what he was doing, and I didn't want anything, even something as innocuous as a misspelled word, to reflect poorly on him, because I was a fan. I just thought, they were doing some good stuff. And we got to talking. Next thing I know, he was asking me about what we did. He said, look, I got some problems on my sales team, and I'd love to have you talk with a couple of people and come in and do a little bit of work with us. And next thing I know, he becomes a very, very happy client. So, just a little bit of value doesn't have to be something significant. It could be just a generous act. It could be a supportive comment. I share things like ebooks. I share relevant content and articles, something that might be interesting to that prospect, just to generate some value. Sometimes it's in the form of an introduction to somebody else on my network, which I think is a really, really powerful way. Just say to somebody, is there anybody in my network that you would like to meet that I could make a personal introduction to? I'd be happy to do it. I've lost track of the number of times that I've done that for people. And I've probably put that out there hundreds, if not thousands of times with people. Now, maybe I've actually ended up having to do it 30, 40 times, but that return of value was worth it to me. That little bit of investment of time was definitely worth it because they got some value from me. Now, the second part of this statement, the be patient, this is one of those things that I think has become really challenging for people because our society has now gotten used to this. And this is a sad commentary, but it's very true. Has gotten used to people connecting on LinkedIn, and within, if not a couple of hours, a couple of minutes, sometimes immediately, they get a pitch. I mean, some people build a pitch inside the connection notification for them to connect to somebody. It's like an immediate pitch, like right away. No patience, no nothing, no value. Just here I am. Here's what I do. I can do this for you. And I'm going to tell you that you tend to lose more people than you ever gain by doing that. And you're better off being a little patient. And, here's kind of how I approached that patience. And I just described one situation. So somebody connects with me on LinkedIn. My typical response is, thank you so much for connecting. It's great to be connected to you. If I can be of help to you in any way or introduce you to anybody in my network, please let me know. I'm happy to help. And then I will intentionally not go back and communicate with that person for at least a couple of days. And this is where the be patient part comes in. Now, I know some people may disagree with that, and I know some people may not necessarily be a big fan of that, but I take that approach. I take that patient approach because, number one, I don't want to be compared to those people that are out there just pitching immediately. And number two, I want to give that person that I've connected to a little bit of time to look at my profile, a little bit of time to maybe check out who's in my network and see, is there somebody they may want to connect with, to actually utilize the value that I could provide them. And then I'll follow up with something like, hey, I'm just following up. I took some time to really do a deep dive on your profile. And sometimes what I'll do personally is I'll record a little video message of me scrolling on their profile and looking at things and include that in my message back to them to show that I was seriously looking at their profile. And I'll say something like, I'm really interested in getting to know, a little bit more about you and your business, and not just on, what I can find online, but like on a personal level. I'm trying to really develop personal relationships with the people I connect with and create kind of a value proposition around collaboration. And again, a little patience. I'm not talking at all about what I do. I'm not talking at all about what I'm, hoping that they might be interested in my product set. I'm speaking specifically about literally what I could do for them. And that casual follow-up after reviewing their profile looks very, very impactful for them. It really gives you a much better positioning of engaging them in a way that is interested in providing value to them. I don't talk about my offerings unless they ask. I don't get into any of that stuff. And part of what we're going to talk about today a little bit more over the next couple of minutes about this nurturing process is the first step is the value. You have to create enough value. Now, why is that important? Not only because it immediately helps you stand out from all the people that are out there just pitching to people. And look, I'm not saying that that's wrong for some people. I think there are some situations that make sense, but it doesn't when you're really trying to develop the right relationships. Really what you're going for, and I know this is something we talk about a lot, but this is really important. And this is why that value first is so important, is I want to go back to one of the core elements of Impact Sales Mastery. You are starting the early stages of laying the foundation for you to earn the right to be their trusted advisor. Now, just going back and refreshing everybody's memory on ISM in this particular statement, you earn that right by acting differently, by asking better questions, by getting to know them before just pitching your product. You're trying to become their trusted advisor. You know, sometimes people have what I call a disjointed process where they pitch, and then they're surprised that they're not a trusted advisor, or they don't add value. And then they see an opportunity to schedule an appointment, but they haven't really done anything of value. And they get on the call and they make it all about them. And they kind of forgot to lay the foundation of earning the right to be a trusted advisor. So you lead with value first. You're patient. You start to lay the foundation for becoming their trusted advisor. And how that's done should be very familiar to all of you, because it really is something that we talk about at the tail end of Impact Sales Mastery in the closing. And we started it at the beginning, but even before you even get into the actual sales engagement, the sales process point, there's a place for you to start positioning. And that can be sometimes in the nurturing aspects. You know, you just when you're trying to get somebody on a call or trying to, you know, get them to engage, you don't have to be on a call to start that process. I like to start nurturing people by opening up that powerful opening statement that I use in ISM, and it's worded slightly different than what it is in the actual sales portion, but it's very much the same. And it's a question that goes something like this: for me to provide the greatest benefit for you and have the biggest impact, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? And normally this happens when somebody starts asking me questions about what I do. And I'll usually say, you know, I'll be happy to answer those things. But before I do that, for me to provide the greatest benefit for you and have the biggest impact, do you mind if I ask you some questions? And why do I do that? Because I'm twisting it around. I'm nurturing them. And I want to get them from the suspect stage to the prospect stage. And why is that so powerful? Well, you know this because, number one, I'm not selling to them if they're only a suspect, right? I don't know enough to call them a prospect yet, so I'm not going to sell. I'm not going to be talking about what I do. I'm going to try to nurture them. So how do I nurture them? I've got to get them talking about themselves. I've got to figure out all the criteria that I need to get to be able to call them a prospect. For me to get them comfortable to share, I've got to give them something that's in it for them. For me to provide the greatest benefit for you and to have the biggest impact, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? I'd like to learn more about you. And then I get them talking. I get them going through very much the same process that we talk about all through ISM, about asking impact-focused questions. Ultimately, so we are able to go back to, and this is where we shared this last week. It's so powerful. It's pervasive across everything that we do. It's so we can tap into their why. So we can tap into, why is something important to them? Why do they do what they do? Why does it mean what it means? Why will it have the impact that it'll have? What are the things that make up your prospect's why? And the reason that that is so important, the reason that that simply is the best way of nurturing is it keeps it all front and center about what's important to them. You don't fall victim to tripping over yourself to talk about how great your product, service, or offering is, because you're talking about all about them. You're uncovering what you need to know to convert them from being a suspect to a prospect. And the nurturing aspect can happen in a lot of different ways. So like you may be online, let's say you're on LinkedIn and they start chatting you up and you get connected, don't hesitate to open with a very powerful question such as this one after you talk to them a little bit and say, look, I'd love to talk more about what I do, but for me to provide you the greatest benefit and to have the biggest impact, do you mind if I ask you a few questions first? Ask them a few things. Once you get them chatting a little bit and sharing a little bit, then say, there's a lot more that I'd love to know about what it is that you're doing and how I could potentially impact you. Would you mind if we kind of shift this to a scheduled call and dedicate a little time to this? Because I really think there's a lot that we could be going over together that I know would have a huge impact. Would you be okay with scheduling a brief call to kind of go through some things? And make it casual, make it something that's a simple process to take them from just somebody you're chatting up with that's just a suspect. You have some basic information. Maybe you get a couple of other pieces, but you aren't quite sure, to now I'm going to get them on a call. And I know when I get on that call, I'm going to figure out either they're going to stay a suspect or I'm going to get them to the prospect stage pretty quickly. And this form of nurturing is very much aligned with how you're going to be consistent across your sales process. If you nurture people from suspect to prospect using this approach, it's only natural and only normal and only very comfortable for you to go back to do the same thing as it intensifies through the sales process. It doesn't have to be as deep early on. It could be just a couple of really simple questions on the periphery, but it's a powerful open. It gets them to feel that you've got some value to offer. And literally from that point on, you then just shift them towards intensifying the communication, moving them into the sales process, making sure you qualify them, and working them through the normal impact-driven questions that you would normally ask. It's really that simple. And sometimes we get caught up in, well, people aren't responding and people aren't getting back to me with my messages. And that's going to happen, right? We know that's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of people that aren't going to respond. There's going to be people that'll never respond. There'll be people that'll respond 3 months from now because they never checked their LinkedIn. There'll be other people that will respond immediately. Just immediately. They'll just respond. And the only way that you're going to start that process on the right foot, though, is to start nurturing them early, asking them questions, getting permission to ask the questions. Remember, the power behind this positioning is you're asking for permission. They grant you permission, which is a quasi agreement for you to provide the greatest benefit and impact that you can. Because later on, you're going to say, look, remember when we started all this, I asked you if I could ask you a few questions. And I told you that the reason I was asking them, and if you answered them, that I'd be able to provide you the greatest benefit and have the biggest impact. Well, now I can do that. And now I feel like I have exactly what you're looking for to do that. So don't let your nurturing efforts seem overcomplicated to you or clunky. They don't have to be. If your prospect isn't engaging, mix it up, try something different. But always remember rule number one, to go back to something that would be of extreme value to them. When they are communicating with you, make sure you start to lay the foundation for you to be a trusted advisor. You're not an order taker. You're not a vendor. You want to be a trusted advisor and resource to your clients. So you start that foot the right way. You start asking the right questions. Lay that foundation. You start gathering the information you need to become a prospect. the 6 criteria that we talk about in ISM, all about getting them qualified. You don't ever get into the specifics of what you do, nor do you ever sell or propose when somebody is still a suspect. One of the biggest rules we talk about, and we share it a lot, is don't sell to suspects. It's not going to go anywhere. You're not going to get the results you're looking for. You're going to be frustrated. They're not going to be happy. Qualify them first, then work in that direction. But the foundation of it all, providing value and positioning. Position yourself as that trusted advisor to have the greatest benefit and impact for your clients. And you can do that quite simply if you follow this process that we're talking about today. Now, before I jump into the Q&A, I want to add one more thing about the suspects to prospect nurturing. When in doubt, when you aren't sure that you've done a good enough job, it's pretty straightforward. They're not a prospect until you've gotten those 6 criteria answered. But if somebody is kind of lingering in that stage and you haven't been able to clarify, are they really a prospect? Like, do they really have a need? Is there budget available? You go down the whole list of the criteria, right? If you're still in that limbo and you haven't done that and you stall, somehow things stall, always remember that you can go back and restart the process by saying something. When we first started chatting online, I had asked you if I could ask you a few questions, for me to be able to provide the greatest benefit and have the biggest impact. I needed to ask you a few questions. Do you mind if I just ask you 1 or 2 more and try to jumpstart it again? Try to get them to share what they need to share to figure out if they're a prospect or not. But the goal for you should be to keep that in mind at all times, because the reason why that's so powerful for you is when you position this way early, when they're just suspects, and you're literally qualifying them as prospects following this format, it seems very natural when you lead into this sales process, digging deeper, doing the same things. When you really, really start digging into the why, when you really start digging into those impact-driven questions and the answers and what they mean to that person and why it's so important to them and what their business would look like if they do it, what it would look like if they don't do it. When they start just bearing their soul to you about all of the things that you're uncovering and the questions that you're asking, that's where you're earning the right to be their trusted advisor. That's when you're really kind of earning your stripes. And it's really easy to set that table the right way if you start nurturing your suspects the very same way. Now, you don't have to go as far. You don't have to dig as deep. You don't have to go chapter and verse into it, but you do want to start them talking that way because it immediately creates alignment in what it is that you're talking about with your prospect. So with that said, I'm going to open things up to questions. It can be about what we talked about today with suspects, prospects, nurturing, positioning, any of that, or it can be any other sales related topic. Who's got something for me today? You can just unmute yourself and ask if you have a question.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, David, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you.
Good.
You had said something earlier, and I think I missed the second part, but then I think I answered the question. You answered the question later on. You reached out to someone. I saw something in your post, and that's where you want to add value to them or give something to them in terms of what's in it for them. It's like, maybe this would help, or can I connect you with so-and-so kind of thing. But that's not where you say, perhaps I could help you.
No, that's just where you're offering up something. And that offer could be a lot of things, David. It could be validation. It could be, oh my gosh, I'm so in agreement with what you have on your profile or in your post or in this comment. Sometimes validation is enough to get them to feel like it's valuable and they want to start chatting with you. Many times it's sharing something like an article, a piece of content, some relevant data, fact, something that they may find interesting. But it's never about what you do. Yeah, because if you make it about what you do too early, you're starting down that process of trying to like sell your suspect, which you don't want to do. Now,
Right.
what'll happen, and I'm happy you asked that question, David. What'll happen though is sometimes sometimes suspects are impatient, right? God bless them. I love it when they're like this. But they'll say, "So what do you do?" Or tell me about what you offer. I'm happy you asked that, and I'd love to share more with you specifically about what I do. I cover a broad array of different things, but for me to have the greatest benefit for you and to have the biggest impact, I'd love to ask you a couple of questions so I can really narrow my focus. Would that be okay? And you make it about them. You start asking them questions about themselves before you ever get to yourself. Does that make sense, David?
It does, but I'm I'm just because so people are so push button, uh, I'm thinking that the response to that you gave to what do you do is yeah, I was just curious. What do you do? You know what I mean? But
Sure.
I was just curious
Well, I mean, I think it all
because people
depends.
ask, "What do you do?" But so you don't know that when someone's asking, "What do you do?" that they're asking because I need to know because I need help. And then if you go into, well, I need to ask you a question so I can be of value to you, doesn't that already automatically sound like you're starting to pitch them?
Sure,
And you don't.
it could if you start talking specifically about how. Like, the filler in that is, yeah, I agree. I mean, if you just respond just with that, people might think, "Oh, how did I just find myself into this sales interaction?" Right? But that's not really kind of what I'm going for. I mean, there's nothing wrong with you turning around and saying, you know, I'm a health coach. I help people with a wide array of different health related things and get them moving in the right direction. That really wasn't what I was kind of leaning towards. I was more interested in learning a little bit more about you. Like I will tell people all the time, like I help people solve sales problems. I'm not assuming you have any, but I am very interested in getting to know kind of a little bit about you and what you do for me to have the greatest benefit and have the biggest impact for you. Though, if you don't mind, I'd love to ask you a couple questions.
So it's really a little bit more give and take until you find out that the person really is, interested about what you do for
Yeah.
them.
Well, yeah, of course. Remember, one of the qualifiers to turn them from a suspect to a prospect is they have to be genuinely interested and have a need or want for what it is that you do. I'm not
Hmm.
implying that they do. I'm just getting into a conversation and I'm asking permission to ask them some questions.
Yeah, good. That's a very good distinction. It's so telling how many people just pitch right off the bat
Mm-hmm.
because there's been many times, where I've reached out just to add value, just as you said, or validation or something like that. And I say nothing about what I do whatsoever. I don't say anything about me. And sometimes the response is, I'm not looking for a health coach. Thank you. And I like, well, good. I wasn't offering. I'm not even,
Yeah.
I was just saying, it's like that thing you put was so great or whatever. Just even sometimes I just wish a person a happy birthday, but it is, I mean, but that's very telling, people really do just go out and pitch. And when I do that, some then people are like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I've just been inundated with like, I totally get it. Yeah, so absolutely."
Yeah.
And then some of those folks, and this has been, this years in the making, some of those folks have actually, uh, you know, at a later date reached out to me to find out more about what I do. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, and remember this, everybody, and this is why this is so important. One of the key elements of becoming somebody's trusted advisor, one of the initial elements that is really a requirement is you have to differentiate yourself from everybody else. Like you have to be different from everybody else. Like you separate yourself from the pack, then you start going deeper and getting to know them better. You start earning that right a different way. If you sound like everybody else, you're perceived like you're everybody else. So it's really important that you keep that in mind. But it's a really good question that you brought up, David.
Hey
Okay,
Joe.
who's got another question for me?
Hey Joe.
Yes, sir.
Wouldn't you say, I was thinking as you were, and this is kind of like kicking off the last question, was that, if somebody that really doesn't engage you when you're trying to ask questions, then, really we're trying to pre-qualify these folks. Are they a suspect or a prospect? And if they won't engage you, they're a suspect. So, game over. If they will, from what I heard you saying, we have to remember, I think is it's not about us, it's what's in it for them. That's all they care about. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, of course. I would agree with that. I think that the qualification, and this is something that's really important, the qualification process never ends. Just because somebody is qualified enough to be called a prospect doesn't mean that you stop qualify them further, right? But you have to make it all about them and what they get. And timing may not be right for them. It may not be an interest for them right now. I always take the approach like, look, I just want to get to know you. And if it's something that you feel down the road, you may have a need or an interest in what it is that we do, this way I'll know a little bit more about you. And, we'll have a better relationship when the time is right. It may not be now. It may be never. That's okay. But I want to make it all about what they get and less about anything we do. When people are right and ready and they want to know about what it is that you do and the impact it'll have on them, they'll make it abundantly clear. They will be clear. They will say, "Can you tell me more about this?" They'll start giving you a lot of signs.
Thanks, Joe.
You're very welcome, Chris. Who's got
I do.
another question?
Susie.
Hey, Susie.
Like, as if you didn't know this was Susie, because I'm the only woman on the call. But so I am still getting, I'm gonna be generous and say 2. I'm gonna be conservative and say 2 cold pitches a day from marketing firms or sales firms saying that they're the only ones that can get me meetings on my calendar.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be conservative and say 2 a day. It's more than that, but I'm going to be conservative and say 2. All through LinkedIn, a lot of them will try to connect with me and say, "Hey, as a fellow coach, I see that you blah, 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 blah." Okay. So now that I am so in tune with the difference between a suspect and a prospect and the 6 qualifications that they have to meet, whenever I see a message from one of these places saying, "Hey, Susie, I see that you're a fellow coach. How would you like to add 3 to 5 appointments on your calendar per week?" And normally that would seem like a really appropriate number, right? But because of the ISM stuff, my first thought is, how many phone calls are we actually talking about, or how many conversations are we actually talking about to get to those 3 to 5 appointments? As soon as people say that to me now, I only think of how many numbers does it take to get to the number you're actually talking to me about. So
Sure.
I just wanted to add that. Yes.
Well, and it's an interesting point. And I think there are a lot of great resources that are out there to do certain functional pieces of what people need inside their business. Sometimes they align well with what the business is working on. Sometimes they don't. Like, you can go out and solve any problem out there by writing a check. It's just a matter of, is the check the right amount for the right product or service from the right resource, right? That's always out there. There's nothing wrong with those messages per se, because the value is, if somebody has an interest in that type of a service or an offering, leading with it is not a bad idea, because, well, that's a big problem. That's a problem that I think is pervasive across a lot of businesses. I know in the sales activist, especially, as many of you know, that's a constant struggle. But I do think, you know, it's not as simple as just saying, hey, we'll fill your calendar, we'll do this, we'll solve for X with Y. Like it's never that simple. It's, do you have enough confidence, belief, and trust in the person that's making the offer to feel like it's worth doing? That's the dividing line. So there's like those messages, I think they're fine. I think there's a certain percentage of people that will respond to that because they have an immediate need. Makes a lot of sense. But then the follow-up layer to that, Susie, is where, whether you use those types of messages or whether you're receiving them, the follow-up layer is somewhere in there is a qualification process. Are they the right fit? And this works both ways. Is the suspect the right type suspect to be converted to a prospect for that particular service provider? Is that service provider the right type service provider to provide the right service at the right price under the right terms and conditions for that prospect? Like, it works both ways. The messaging is just to create awareness and attention to ultimately create some form of an engagement, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. I think when you're dealing with, especially when you're dealing with something that is a very personal offering, in some cases, it's not quite as powerful doing that. I think you do need to warm up and earn credibility first. I think with other certain functional tech-driven type services, it's not as important. So you have to look at every situation, every particular problem or need, and look at the solution.
And Joe, wouldn't you say that we have to think relational? I think sometimes we're so driven as salespeople that we can almost think transactional, even though we tell ourselves we're not, and we sometimes don't focus enough on building the relationship, whether it be we help them now or we help them later.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a great point, Chris. I think that is fundamental in what any trusted advisor should do for their clients. Like, you shouldn't be just thinking transactionally. And I'll give you an example. Like, I was on the phone with somebody yesterday who desperately needs ISM. They know it, they admitted it, they would love to do it. And in this particular conversation, I literally said to them, because I'm familiar with the circumstances, because I'm very familiar with some of the challenges that they're going through right now, and they were very transparent about what the challenges were. And I said to them, I think this is the right solution for you, but it's not the right time. Like, you've got two bigger problems you have to address right now. And once those are addressed, we'll be here and we'll be ready to work with you. But right now, your bigger problems are these two things. And, you know, the salesperson in me was like, well, this guy's ready. He's financially qualified. He probably could have easily done it. The issue wasn't that. The issue was it wouldn't be the right thing. It wouldn't be the right time for him under the current circumstances, specifically because of some things he was going through. And ultimately, it would have made it a lot harder for him to be successful in the program. So rather than thinking transactionally, I thought relationally. You know, in 3 months, when this guy cleans up a couple of things, he's going to be a client. I would have loved to have seen him be a client today, but under those circumstances, the right thing is to say, you're not ready for this. You will be in 90 days, but right now, deal with this. And not everybody in today's world will do that. Like, and I'm not advocating martyrdom for anybody in how they run their business, but you do have to ask yourself, in any relationship, is the business relationship going to be productive for both sides? Are both parties going to feel like it was a good experience? And at the end of it, is everybody going to be happy? And if you look at that situation from a relational standpoint and you believe the answer is yes, then you should move forward if everything else is in place. But if you know deep down that there's a reason why the answer would probably be no, the right moral and ethical thing to do is to say, no, not right now. Like, this isn't the right time. This isn't the right set of circumstances. It will be in whatever time frame. In this case, with this guy, it was probably 90 days. But the fact is, you always should be thinking relationally, and I know there are people on this call, because you've shared some stories with me, that, you've stepped away from business with clients because it wasn't the right time or circumstances. And ultimately it came back to benefit you. It took a little time, but it came back to benefit you. And that's what a trusted advisor does. Those are the types of things that somebody who walks the talk does. They will go, this may not benefit me right now. It'll benefit me later, but I'm going to win their business by taking either the high road or the longer road to help them. And that is always the right way of doing business. Sorry, I went off on a little bit of a rant there, Chris, but that's a big point with me. Like, I think thinking relationally is so much more important than thinking transactionally.
Agreed. Thanks, Joe.
You're very welcome. Okay, other questions? Who else has another question for me?
Morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Hey, Adonis, how are you?
Doing all right, man. Just working my tail off, as always. I was gonna ask, so a lot of times on LinkedIn, I'm actually the type of dude who gets a lot of meetings and sales through, connecting and pretty quickly jumping into what we're offering. And the reason why I typically will do this is because I kind of have a perspective on LinkedIn that everybody's trying to play the PR route of like, oh, I don't want to seem like, I'm going right after it, or I'm going after the offer, or, jumping straight into business, right?
Yeah.
I won't always do it, but for the most part, I do it because I hold to the belief that most people know that you're on LinkedIn to connect and to sell services.
Sure.
Like if we're being honest, like when someone connects with me, I know they're not connecting with me just to connect and be my friend. Like if that was it, this would be Facebook, right? Like this isn't Facebook. This is a business platform. So like when someone connects with me, I actually almost kind of prefer that they come right on out and say what they do.
Yeah.
And like, tell me like, why are you connecting with me? Right. Or why are you trying to connect with me? So for me, and this is just my personal opinion and experience, and, maybe you can verify that this is something you believe or don't believe too, but I think it really comes down to the offer and how it fits with the person that you're reaching out to. If I see that somebody really doesn't have a need for something that I'm offering, I don't want to connect and pitch that.
Yeah.
But if I do see that they post online, for example, my business is sales recruiting, right? And so maybe my first message to them after connecting is, hey, man, thanks so much for connecting. I happen to see that you guys have this enterprise account executive opening, and I just met with this dude who's making $3 million over the last 3 years in your space. Would you be interested in interviewing someone like this? And so that would be like a starting point. And then they would respond with, oh, wow, like that's impressive. Like, could you tell me a little bit more about this person? And we start talking about the candidate and the person that I would potentially be placing with them. And then that kind of earns me that meeting, right? To be able to discuss with them my services, the people that I represent, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it depends on the offer and the person that you're reaching out to. Like, do they have a need for what you're offering? And is it an obvious one, right? Like with coaching, it's kind of hard to tell because it's kind of like, okay, technically everybody needs coaching. Like if we're being real, everybody needs it, but not everybody, is going to feel like it's a priority at that time, unless they're like posting online, like, hey, I need a sales coach, which at that point in time, I might just connect with them directly and say, hey man, you said that you were looking for a coach. I'm just curious, like what kind of coach are you looking for, and what qualifies a good coach in your opinion, right? So I don't know, that's maybe an example of how I think. I just think that the whole facade of like I'm connecting to be your friend first and then sell you, I just think it's kind of a little bit disingenuous most of the time. And so what are your thoughts on that? Have you had anyone tell you that like it seems kind of disingenuous?
No, because I never say I want to be somebody's friend. I mean, you know what it is? I tell people all the time, it's like, look, I want to develop genuine relationships with people. It doesn't mean I want to be their friend. It just means that I prefer to really get to know people before I decide if it's somebody that would be a great fit. Like, and
Mhm.
it's probably important to clarify, like, I wouldn't have asked him just going back to this prospect, I wouldn't have asked him to join ISM. I mean, through the midst of the conversation, we got to the point where we had clarified almost everything. He had mentioned a couple of, personal challenges he was dealing with. And at that point, I kind of disqualified him, at least right now. But
Mhm.
at that stage, I had asked, he was very interested in learning more about what we did. So I did describe briefly ISM, and, he was basically the one pushing, saying, this is something I need to do.
Right.
And I said, I'm not going to disagree with that. I'm going to say that you need to do it. You just probably need to do it as badly as you need to address these two other things that are in front of you right now.
Right.
And
Right.
it wasn't something like I didn't pull the guy aside trying to develop a personal relationship with him. I just wanted to get to know him and understand a little bit what he was dealing with in his business before we got to that stage.
Right. I do,
So,
to clarify too, I do the same thing, but usually
yeah.
to start off, I'm looking for something on their profile or on their website or something pertaining to their role that I can immediately help with, especially as it pertains to like recruitment and marketing and those types of things. So like, the conversation begins more or less with me touching on something that is very public or something that they've posted.
Yep.
And then from there, I want to be as relational as I can possibly be, following up with them, understanding their situation, asking questions, those types of things. I never just like do business with anybody. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very selective, but at the same time, to start off, I'm always looking for where does this person fit within the services that I provide, and to kind of start that conversation, right?
Yeah.
About what it is that I'm doing, how I can help them potentially. I never say for sure that I can. But if I ask them if they're open to it or if they're looking for the type of help that I offer.
Yeah. Yeah. And it, as with a lot of things, and this is important for everybody to take into consideration, um, it's never just what you do, it's how you do it that really makes the bigger impact. So,
Right.
what you're saying sometimes matters less than just the way you're doing it, like how you do it. And I think, and this is easy to say, but it's not always easy to deliver, especially when you're trying to do things a certain way. Just focus on being genuine and being sincere in what you do, and the rest kind of takes care of itself in that regard, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so it's one of those things, um, that I think, if you defer to being yourself, just being genuine and trying to make it about them and learning about them first, you'll figure out a way. Even if it's not as, it doesn't have to be as direct as I describe it. It could take a lot of curves and turns. But ultimately, your best likelihood for success in selling to somebody is going to be once you qualify them as a legitimate prospect first anyway.
Right.
So you might as well just figure out a way of kind of negotiating and getting that through, across to your person, and just kind of listen, pay attention. The right time will make itself very, very clear to you once you identify and know all those criteria are met. They'll either, as we've talked about, they'll either ask you, so what do you do and how can you help me? Or can you address that problem for me? Can you do that for me? Because you've done a great job of positioning it that way. Or it'll become abundantly clear that they're open to start hearing more about what you could do to help them.
Yeah.
And once you get to that point, it becomes a lot easier. There's no doubt. Okay. Well, we are just about out of time. So, guys, I appreciate you joining us today on the Impact Sales Tribe VIP call. We have another great topic coming up next week, so make sure you put it in your calendar to join us the same time next week. It's going to be another deeper layer of ISM that we're going to share to make sure that you are all making the most of some of the skills that we've shared during ISM. So don't miss next week's session as well. It's going to be a good one. This is Joe Beck with the Sales Activist, and we'll see you guys soon. Take care.